She was a titan of the seas, a name whispered with a mix of awe and fear across the Pacific. She was born from compromise, forged into a weapon, and became the very symbol of Japanese naval air power. From the revolutionary, if slightly bonkers, triple-deck design to her final fiery agony at the Battle of Midway, the story of the Japanese aircraft carrier Akagi is the story of an empire's ambition and its devastating fall. This wasn't just a ship. It was a legend, a flagship that led the most daring carrier strike in history and whose destruction marked the turning point of the war in the Pacific. So strap in, because today we're diving deep into the incredible and ultimately tragic history of the Imperial Japanese Navy's Akagi. Our story begins not with an aircraft carrier, but with a battlecruiser. In the aftermath of World War I, the great naval powers were locked in an arms race. Japan, eager to assert its dominance in the Pacific, laid down 4 massive Amagi-class battlecruisers. Akagi, meaning Red Castle, named after a mountain in Japan, was one of them. Laid down in Kure in December 1920, she was designed to be a fast, heavily armed behemoth, bristling with 10 16.1-inch or 410mm guns. But politics, as it often does, threw a wrench in the works. The 1922 Washington Naval Treaty, aimed at preventing another costly arms race, put strict limits on the number and size of capital ships. Japan, along with Britain and the United States, had to scrap or convert many of its planned battleships and battlecruisers. 2 Amagi-class ships, Amagi and Akagi, were earmarked for a new, revolutionary role: conversion into aircraft carriers. It was a compromise, a way to save these expensive hulls while exploring the burgeoning field of naval aviation. Fate intervened again when the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923 severely damaged the Amagi's hull beyond repair. So the slightly smaller Kaga and Tosa-class battleship, also slated for scrapping, was chosen to take her place, and Akagi pressed on, destined to become one of the world's first large fleet carriers. Launched in April 1925 and commissioned in March 1927, the Akagi that emerged was, well, let's call it unique. The early designers of aircraft carriers were grappling with a fundamental problem: how to launch and land planes as quickly and efficiently as possible on a moving ship. Akagi represented one of the most ambitious and ultimately flawed solutions. Instead of a single long flight deck, she featured 3 distinct, superimposed flight decks. The idea was that fighters could launch from the short, 18.5-meter, 60 feet 8 inches middle deck, while heavier attack planes used the 55-meter, 180 feet 6 inches lower deck, and the 190-meter, 624-foot main upper deck, which was primarily for landing. It sounds clever in theory, a way to get a lot of aircraft airborne simultaneously. In practice, it was a bit of a mess. The lower and middle decks were simply too short for the increasingly large and powerful aircraft coming into service. They saw very little use, and the whole arrangement ate up valuable space. Adding to the experimental feel, Akagi had no island superstructure initially. Instead, command and control were handled from a bridge structure under the forward edge of the main flight deck. She was also fitted with 2 massive, downward-curving funnels on her starboard side, designed to keep smoke away from landing aircraft, a feature that actually worked reasonably well. Armament-wise, she retained some of her battlecruiser heritage, carrying 10 203mm or 8-inch guns intended to fight off enemy cruisers, a concept that would soon become obsolete for carriers. With an initial capacity of around 60 aircraft, Akagi began her career as a floating testbed, helping the Imperial Japanese Navy, or IJN, write the book on carrier operations. Even future legends like Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto took command of her during these formative years. But as aircraft evolved, it became clear that Akagi's unconventional design couldn't keep up. It was time for a major makeover. Between 1935 and 1938, Akagi went back into the Sasebo Naval Arsenal for a reconstruction that transformed her into the ship most people recognize today. The triple decks vanished, replaced by a single, extended flight deck stretching almost her entire 260.67 meter, 855 feet 3 inches length. This, along with hangar extensions, dramatically increased her aircraft capacity to a formidable 91 planes, 66 operational and 25 in storage. Her engines were upgraded, and her hull was slightly modified, boosting her top speed to over 31 knots, 57 kilometers per hour or 36 miles per hour, making her one of the fastest carriers afloat. But the most striking and controversial change was the addition of an island superstructure. Unlike almost every other carrier ever built, Akagi's island was placed on the port side. Why? It was another IJN experiment. The idea was that carriers often operated in pairs. By having one carrier with a portside island, Akagi, and another with a standard starboard side island, like her near sister Kaga, or later, Hiryu, their funnels and islands wouldn't create air turbulence in the same landing approach zone, theoretically making simultaneous operations smoother. It sounded good on paper, but pilots hated it. They were used to the standard port hand landing pattern, and the port side island complicated approaches, creating dangerous air currents right where they didn't need them. The experiment was deemed a failure, and only Akagi and Hiryu ever featured this oddity. Her heavy guns were removed, replaced with a more carrier-appropriate, though still somewhat inadequate and poorly positioned anti-aircraft battery. Despite the island issue, the rebuilt Akagi was a powerhouse, the pinnacle of Japanese carrier design at the time. She saw action during the Second Sino-Japanese War, honing her skills and preparing for the storm that was about to break across the Pacific. By 1941, Akagi was not just a carrier, she was the carrier. She became the flagship of Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo's first air fleet, the Kido Butai, the most powerful carrier strike force the world had ever seen. Alongside Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, Akagi was the heart of Japan's naval might. And in the pre-dawn darkness of December 7, 1941, it was from Akagi's flight deck, flying Admiral Togo's historic battle ensign from the Battle of Tsushima, that Commander Mitsuo Fuchida launched the first wave of aircraft towards an unsuspecting Pearl Harbor. Akagi's Mitsubishi A6M0s, Ichi D3A Val dive bombers, and Nakajima B5N Kate torpedo bombers led the devastating assault, crippling the U.S. Pacific Fleet and plunging America into World War II. Akagi's planes claimed hits on battleships like the Oklahoma, West Virginia, and Maryland. It was a stunning success, a testament to years of training and technological development, with Akagi right at its center. Following Pearl Harbor, Akagi and the Kido Butai embarked on a 6-month rampage across the Pacific and Indian Oceans, seemingly unstoppable. In January 1942, they supported the invasion of Rabaul in New Britain. In February, they launched a massive air raid on Darwin, Australia, sinking numerous ships and devastating the port. They swept through the Dutch East Indies, covering the invasion of Java. In April, they entered the Indian Ocean, sinking the British heavy cruisers HMS Cornwall and HMS Dorsetshire, and later the light aircraft carrier HMS Hermes, along with its destroyer escort. It was a masterclass in carrier warfare. Akagi and her sisters demonstrated a reach and destructive power that few had thought possible. They were the pride of the IJN, symbols of victory, seemingly invincible. But pride, as they say, often comes before a fall, and Akagi's fall would be as swift and dramatic as its rise. The target was Midway Atoll, a tiny but strategic American outpost in the Central Pacific. Admiral Yamamoto, now Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, believed that by attacking Midway, he could lure the remaining American carriers into a decisive battle, a Kantai Kessen, where he could annihilate them and secure Japan's dominance. It was an ambitious, complex plan, involving multiple fleets spread across hundreds of miles. Once again, Akagi was Nagumo's flagship, leading a force of 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, into what they hoped would be their crowning victory. But the Americans, thanks to breaking the Japanese naval codes, knew they were coming. They had their own carriers, Yorktown, Enterprise, and Hornet, lying in wait, ready to spring a trap. On the morning of June 4, 1942, Akagi launched her first strike against Midway Island. The attack did significant damage, but the island's airfield remained operational, and its aircraft were already airborne. Then came the reports. American carriers had been sighted. This was the moment the battle turned, and Akagi was at its very heart. Nagumo faced a critical, agonizing decision. His planes returning from Midway needed to land. His reserve planes were armed with bombs for a second strike on the island. But now, American ships were the priority. He ordered his crews to rearm the planes with torpedoes, a frantic, time-consuming process that left his hangar decks cluttered with high explosives and fuel lines. Confusion reigned, compounded by conflicting scout reports and relentless attacks by American aircraft from Midway. Then came the American carrier planes. First, the torpedo bombers. Slow, vulnerable, they flew straight and level into a wall of flak and zeros. They suffered horrific losses, scoring no hits, but they achieved something crucial. They pulled the Japanese fighter cover down to sea level, leaving the carriers exposed from above. And at 10:22 a.m., the American SBD Dauntless dive bombers arrived. High above, Lieutenant Commander Clarence Wade McCluskey, leading dive bombers from the USS Enterprise, spotted the wake of a lone Japanese destroyer, and following it, found the Kido Butai. At 10:26 a.m., just minutes after Soryu and Kaga were hit, 3 Dauntlesses, led by Lieutenant Commander Richard Dick Best, peeled off and dove towards Akagi. Amidst the chaos of evasive maneuvers and anti-aircraft fire, they dropped their bombs. 2 were near misses, bracketing the ship. But the third, a 1,000-pound, 454-kilogram bomb, struck home. It wasn't a direct hit on an ammunition store or an engine room, but it was just as deadly. It smashed through the flight deck at the aft edge of the middle elevator and exploded in the upper hangar. The timing couldn't have been worse. The hangar was packed with fully fueled and armed B-5N Kates, preparing for the strike against the American carriers. The single bomb hit detonated torpedoes and ignited thousands of gallons of aviation fuel. A catastrophic chain reaction began. A massive fireball erupted from the elevator shaft, engulfing the bridge and flight deck in flames. Secondary explosions ripped through the ship. Fires spread uncontrollably, fed by fuel and ammunition. A near miss jammed Akagi's rudder hard to port, sending the giant carrier circling helplessly. On the bridge, Captain Taijiro Aoki and Vice Admiral Nagumo were initially stunned. The heat was intense, the smoke suffocating. Nagumo, a cautious man often overwhelmed by the pace of carrier warfare, seemed paralyzed until his chief of staff, Rear Admiral Ryunosuke Kusaka, convinced him to transfer his flag. It was a perilous escape. They had to climb down ropes from the bridge windows as flames licked around them. Captain Aoki and his crew fought heroically to save their ship. They tried to flood the magazines, but the controls were destroyed. They battled the inferno with hoses and extinguishers. But it was hopeless. The fires were too intense, too widespread. The heart of the ship was being burned out. Throughout the afternoon and into the night, Akagi burned. She remained afloat, a massive drifting funeral pyre, a stark silhouette against the smoke-filled sky. Though her engines were still technically functional, the fires made any attempt to move her impossible. The surviving crew, many badly burned, were evacuated. By the early hours of June 5th, it was clear that the flagship, the pride of the Kido Butai, was lost. Admiral Yamamoto, receiving the devastating news far to the rear, finally gave the order he must have dreaded. Akagi must be scuttled. 4 Japanese destroyers, Arashi, Hagikaze, Maikaze, and Nawaki, closed in on their dying flagship. At 5:20 a.m., they fired their torpedoes. Akagi, the Red Castle, slipped beneath the waves, taking with her around 267 men and Japan's hopes of winning the Pacific War. The loss of Akagi, along with Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, sunk later the same day, was a catastrophe from which the Imperial Japanese Navy would never recover. It wasn't just the loss of 4 irreplaceable carriers, it was the loss of hundreds of veteran pilots and experienced aircraft mechanics, the very core of Japan's naval air power. Midway was the turning point, the high water mark of Japanese expansion. From that day forward, Japan would be on the defensive, pushed back step by step across the Pacific until its ultimate defeat. For decades, Akagi rested in darkness, its exact location unknown, nearly 18,000 feet, 5,490 meters, below the surface. Then in October 2019, researchers aboard the RV Petrel, part of Paul Allen's Vulcan Inc. project, located the wreck using sonar. And in September 2023, the Ocean Exploration Trust's EV Nautilus conducted the first-ever visual survey, bringing back haunting images of the once mighty carrier, largely intact but scarred by its fiery end, lying upright on the seabed. It's a silent, deep-sea monument to a pivotal moment in history. Akagi's story is more than just the tale of a warship. It's a chronicle of innovation, ambition, hubris, and sacrifice. From its experimental beginnings to its role as a feared flagship, and its dramatic end in the fires of Midway, Akagi played a central role in shaping the course of World War II. It stands as a powerful reminder of how quickly fortunes can change in war, how technological advantage can be fleeting, and how even the mightiest symbols of power can be brought down in an instant. Its legacy, resting now in the cold, dark depths, continues to fascinate and teach us about the brutal realities of naval conflict. It's incredible to think about the journey that ship took, isn't it? From treaty compromise to fiery grave, Akagi certainly left its mark. And speaking of marks, if you've enjoyed this deep dive into naval history and want to make sure you catch our next mission, consider hitting that subscribe button. It's your way of ensuring you're on board for future explorations. But we also want to hear from you. What piece of military hardware, legendary battle, or unsung hero do you think deserves the spotlight? What military topic are you most eager to learn about? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. Think of it as giving us our next set of orders. We read every single one, and your idea might just be our next deep dive.